Carpool is proudly presented by Classic Cover Prestige. Exceptional cover for exceptional vehicles. Hello and welcome to Carpool. Every week we'll be sharing the latest and greatest vehicles on the market today. Just like the ones coming up in this episode. The 478 kilowatt Urus. It's Lamborghini first, SUV second. BMW's latest X5 has brawns and brains to boot. But first, Aston Martin's all-new sports coupe, the V8 Vantage. While the Aston Martin DB11 is the elegant broadsword of the Aston Martin range, the Vantage, well, it's more at the switchblade end of things. So, a bit of history. Well, the Vantage nameplate has actually been around since the 1950s. In fact, it was first affixed to a DB2. This car's predecessor, the 2005 Vantage, remains Aston Martin's biggest selling model to date, with around 25,000 units sold worldwide. So to say that the current generation Vantage has a lot to live up to is probably understating things a bit. The Vantage's biggest trick is actually its compact size. When you walk up to it, you realise it's not a big car at all. Very taut, the way that it's designed, and it's got 50-50 weight distribution as well, which really helps with that poise on the road. It's got what's known as a forward-mounted engine up front, and at the back is the gearbox. In fact, weight-wise, it's only 1,530 kgs. That's about the same weight as, I don't know, 9 motoring writers. So the Vantage is actually a lot shorter than you imagine. In fact, it's 34 millimetres shorter than a Porsche 911, which kind of kicks to touch the idea that Aston Martin only make big, long vehicles. Have you ever wondered why car companies use golf clubs as a way of measuring boot size? I actually don't know the answer to that, but I do know that Aston Martin are looking after their golf fanatic customers. They've created an aperture in the boot, which means you can actually lay a set of clubs across. It's not bad for a small car. Don't let the golf club dimensions in the boot fool you, though. This car is all about the driver rather than the driver, if you get my drift. This is one small car, but it's big on power. 375 kilowatts of power, in fact, along with 685 newton meters of torque. That's good for a 0 to 100 km/h sprint time of just 3.6 seconds, with an 8-speed box shifting you through the cogs all the way up to a top speed of 300 km/h. Now, it's no great secret that the twin-turbo V8 up front in the Vantage is actually manufactured by AMG. That's right, Mercedes. But you can be sure that Aston Martin have given it a character all of its own. Inside the cabin, it's sports stuff all the way, as you'd expect. There are sports seats and a sports steering wheel with carbon fibre inlay and Alcantara material across the top of the dashboard and all the way up the A-pillars into the roof. Alcantara, by the way, is a grippy, non-reflective, suede-like material that performance car manufacturers have used for some time now to give their sports cars a more, well, grippy, non-reflective atmosphere inside. The dashboard is positioned so it's angled towards the driver, and you sit 10 millimetres lower in this car than you do in the DB11. In fact, the Vantage is all about total immersion. I love the way the steering wheel in the Vantage is laid out. You've got this logical suspension setting button on the left-hand side, and you've got a drive mode button on the right-hand side. You can toggle through 3 different modes, so Sport, Sport Plus and Track. And that, of course, changes the throttle map, and the suspension stiffens up as you go through, so you've got a full race experience for the track mode. Aston Martin's another manufacturer which has adopted push buttons for changing gears. They're arranged in a triangular assembly in the centre console, augmented, of course, by paddles to change gears manually. New to Aston Martin is this car's electronic rear differential, or EDIF. This is linked to the car's electronic stability program and will direct engine power to relevant wheels depending on what the car's doing on the road surface. The system doesn't have the same limitations as a standard mechanical limited slip diff. The car feels more composed as you're going into corners and powering out of them. So it's obviously a very different character from its big brother, the DB11. The Vantage is a point-and-shoot machine. Make no mistake about it, there's so much torque and so much power, that nimble 50-50 weight distribution and that light weight that I was talking about earlier makes it just such an impressive performance machine. You only need to have your foot hovering over the accelerator and it feels like the thing just shoots off into the horizon. It really is quite phenomenal. And that's even in just the sport setting, which is what the car's in when you start it up. Move up from there through Sport Plus and into track if you dare, and really you only want to have track on a track. But Sport Plus in itself is just such a phenomenal way to drive and a phenomenal experience in itself. You've really got to hand it to Aston Martin. They're making the most amazing cars these days. Elegant GTs, visceral performance cars. And remember, they're an independent manufacturer. They don't have a big mass market model, a real cash cow to draw upon to make these amazing cars. You know, there's no family hatch or city car. There's no SUV. Actually, no, there is an SUV. It's coming next year. Of course, if it's an Aston Martin, you know it's going to be fast. Carpool is proudly presented by Classic Cover Prestige. Exceptional cover for exceptional vehicles. It's fair to say that these days the luxury SUV market is pretty crowded, although this one is one of the originators. It's the BMW X5. It's 20 years old this year, would you believe? This latest edition is the M50D. About $177,000 for this one, with a couple of options boxes ticked. But being an X5, you're not wanting for much. This SUV benefits from BMW's belt and braces approach to standard technology. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, this looks like a pretty utilitarian SUV from some angles, aside from that red and blue M badge on the side, of course. But the X5 M50D has its sights firmly fixed on the likes of the Porsche Cayenne and the Mercedes ML in the high-performance SUV game. Because the performance SUV segment is a thing these days. No longer are sports cars the only way in which a manufacturer can thump its chest and tell the world just how good it is. With everybody buying SUVs, you want to sell them. And to sell them, you've got to have some real firepower under the bonnet. It's powered by an M-Performance twin-power turbo diesel. Now, the twin-power part is actually a little bit disingenuous because it's actually got no less than 4 turbos. Yes, the X5 is a large car, but it's also a quick one. 0 to 100 kilometres per hour can be achieved in just 5.2 seconds. It's also immensely practical. You can use those BMW individual roof rails to take a couple of mountain bikes with you on your trails, or you can hitch up a boat to the back and make use of the 2.7-tonne braked tow rating. And there's yet more practicality thanks to BMW's X off-road package. The system features adaptive 2-axle air suspension, which gives you those usual driving modes you'd expect off the tarmac, like gravel, snow, sand. It'll also give you adjustment for the driving dynamics, meaning that gear shift and accelerator feel are mapped depending on which mode you're in. The system also allows you to adjust the ride height plus or minus 40 millimetres, and it even comes with underbody protection front and rear. The evolution of the model is most noticeable from the front. The kidney grille design has really grown over the years, and no, your eyes aren't deceiving you, those lights are blue. They're actually laser lights, and no, that's nothing James Bond would have specified on his fleet car. At speeds above 60 kilometres per hour, these lights shoot out a monochromatic laser beam, which is actually 10 times brighter than a conventional LED. Along with the latest edition of the perennial 3 Series, the X5 is one of the most connected cars that BMW makes. Owners will be able to get updates to the software over the air, which is fantastic because it means one less trip to the dealer. Also, take your high-end Android smartphone, pair it with your car, and it's now a digital key. And the hands-free stuff continues inside the cabin as well. BMW's gesture control system debuted a couple of years ago, but it's actually still a one-of-a-kind system. Gesture control means that drivers can perform certain tasks like changing a radio station or answering a phone call with a simple hand motion. You can even use a pinching motion to drag a view of the car in 3D, which is really handy when you're parked in a tight spot and you want to see exactly how far away that low wall is. It takes a bit of practice to place your hand in exactly the right spot for the small camera above the centre console to see it, but once you've mastered it, it's actually very clever technology. Oh no, before you ask, none of the configurable gestures involve 2 fingers raised in the air, although I do concede that might be handy for deploying the horn. Now, automated parking systems where the car uses radar and cameras to scan for a parking spot and help you reverse into it is nothing new. BMW's system, however, takes things a step further. The car will record its movements at low speeds, and if you find yourself in a tight spot, you can play back those movements to make sure you reverse out safely. So I'll demonstrate that now. Now I parked in this spot and I'm just going to take my foot off the brake and it's just going to slowly roll back of its own accord and essentially map where I've been, and my hands are nowhere near. It'll also do it forwards, meaning that you really can ensure that you get out of a tricky situation as safely as possible. It's pretty cool technology. Even among BMW's own family of SUVs, there's just so much sheet metal vying for your attention. We've got X2s, X3s, X4 and X6 coupes, and later this year they'll even be joined by an X7, which is designed to flick a glove in the face of the Range Rover and insist it meet in a field at dawn. Despite all those distractions, the X5 remains the benchmark. It got everything right 20 years ago, and obviously it's had a few evolutions since then, but it still gets everything right today. Carpool is proudly presented by Classic Cover Prestige. Exceptional cover for exceptional vehicles. There's a new breed of bull in the pedigree paddock, but before you accuse Lamborghini as having jumped on the SUV bandwagon, let me remind you a little bit about their history. Because, of course, this isn't the first time Lamborghini has actually built an SUV. Remember the hardcore Humvee-style LM002 from the 1980s? That thing featured a V12 that was wide as a block of shops, and they only made 300 of them. So while the Urus is definitely the LM002's spiritual successor, it's not its physical. In fact, this thing looks completely different. Lamborghini has been firm from the start. This is a Lamborghini first, SUV second. There are plenty of elements of Lamborghini's past and present in the exterior design language of the Urus. Creases and angles remind of Murcielagos and the current Huracan, while those steeply raked wheel arches are pure 1970s Countach. Even our old friend the LM002 gets a look in with the Urus. If you note those Y-shaped air intakes at the front, they're very reminiscent of that big old beast. The Urus really pulls off quite a neat trick from the driver's seat. You're looking straight ahead through the windscreen and your eye catches this amazing instrument binnacle ahead of you, and of course you glance down and see that iconic Lamborghini badge at the steering wheel. You are in an SUV, but you also feel like you're in a proper Lamborghini race car. It's very well executed. The least surprising news, perhaps, is that Lamborghini has brought a supercar to the school run, with a 4-litre V8 up front, producing 478 kilowatts of power and 850 newton metres of torque. 0 to 100, 3.6 seconds. So all of a sudden, it doesn't seem like such a stretch of the marketing handbook to note that Lamborghini refer to this vehicle as an SSUV. That's super sport utility vehicle. And that is super as in supercar. The Urus is the first Lamborghini to feature the Tamburo selector system. It looks a little bit intimidating when you first get into the car, but actually it's very, very practical to use. On the left-hand side, you've got the anima functions which take you through different drive modes, and you can choose between Strada, Sport, and Corsa obviously is your race mode. I do like the fact that the track mode and the sand mode are right next to each other, so, you know, if you're on a track day and you get stuck in the gravel trap, you're going to get out again pretty fast. And while the Tamburo will let you play around with the dynamic attributes of the Urus, every mode gives you a slightly enhanced exhaust note. I say slightly, it starts off somewhere around Evil Growl and ends up at Norse God of War clearing its throat. In certain modes, the Urus's exhaust system is possibly the angriest I've ever experienced, and I'm sorry, but it's utterly addictive. In Corsa, for example, it spits and snarls. All about volume, but flick it down a few and it's nice and quiet and refined, and no one's going to look at you as you're driving slowly through town. Well, they will look at you, but not for the exhaust note. And the high-tech clever stuff doesn't end there. On the other side, you've got Ego. Now, you might be wondering what on earth Ego is, and it's not what you think. This is actually where you can individualise the car. You can make sure that you've got the absolute optimum suspension settings, acceleration, feel, and steering as well. Now, of course, we can't go too much further without mentioning the Urus's price. This one will cost you around $323,000. But do remember, this is a Lamborghini with 2 extra seats and a decent boot. What other Lamborghini gives you that? So the Urus is obviously a super sport utility vehicle, but just how much practicality can you get into a car that looks like that? Actually, quite a bit. There's a decent-sized boot at the back. It's even got a 3.5-tonne braked tow rating, and the rear wheels actually turn, so they give you the ability to manoeuvre around tight spaces really, really easily, but at speed, they're turning the same way as the front wheels, making sure that you're much more dynamic on the open road. In fact, that word practicality just keeps coming up. Now, even though you've bought an Urus SUV, you've bought a Lamborghini first and foremost, but despite that, this is still a very spacious vehicle. The cockpit, of course, as you'd expect, is very driver-focused. This is a dedicated 4-seater with a big sort of centre console through the middle of the rear bench, but every position for those 4 people on board is very roomy with lots of headroom and lots of legroom as well. I must say, I haven't encountered for some time such a bright, clear infotainment display system. There's also a really nice tactile feel to the touchscreen display. You can hear that sort of physical feedback, that haptic response. Everything's done really, really cleverly in this car. And yes, it does have a serious sound system inside the cabin too. Of course, personally, I don't think I could ever tire of that crackle and growl out of the back of this car. So, a lovely practical SUV. Well, mainly. It remains a Lamborghini, and of course it does everything you expect a Lamborghini to do. It's fast, it's entertaining to drive, it looks outrageous, and it sounds utterly unhinged, but in a good way. In all, if you're a supercar fan, well, the Urus is proof that these are both the strangest and the best of times. Carpool was proudly presented by Classic Cover Prestige. Exceptional cover for exceptional vehicles. Next week on Carpool, the Portofino Ferrari Sun-Seeking Cabrio gets a brand new nameplate. The Mercedes AMG GLC 63S, it's a mouthful and an earful. And BMW's bold and boosted V8 weapon, the M850i.